This video is sponsored by War Thunder. Cities Skylines 2 released its If You Can Dream It, You Can Build It trailer 1 year ago, announcing that the game was coming very, very soon. And with that came, to be fair, huge expectations. The game would of course release but a couple of months after that, in fact the time it takes to gestate a human baby, but it wasn't quite ready. So how's it gone, how does it fare, and is it worth playing now? We'll start with the L's, then look at the dubs and some interesting points along the way. The losses begin for me with the distinct lack of cycleways in Cities Skylines 2. That's a serious point, but also kind of a gag, because there's a lot more underneath the surface. I really do want them though, but let's delve that little bit deeper. Every time there's a patch update to Cities Skylines 2, it brings good changes, absolutely. But is it just me, or every time does something go wrong? No matter how they up their quality assurance, engage more with the community, pull together a panel of some kind of people, it just doesn't quite seem to land every time. Like the tile upkeep confusion that came with the latest economy patch update, for example, or that ginormous death wave. The thing though, outside of the game crashes, and we'll talk more about stability and performance later, a lot of these problems tend to be either misunderstood or perhaps even temporary. They can and often are flushed out. What about the deeper stuff though? The stuff that's harder to fix? Well, firstly, a note to our console friends. Their version, most recently, just earlier this month at the time of recording, was delayed yet again, seemingly indefinitely. Expected to undergo a thorough review later this year, and of course it's ultimately waiting on mods to release. Then we move through to a different point, one that I won't dwell on too much because I know it's just a small sample, but take a look at the player count, an absolute L. Around 8,000 players, 10,000. In their defense, if you look at it on the daily over a 3-month period, it does seem that the game is getting more popular, having recently seen some pretty decent patch updates. If we compare it to Cities Skylines 1 in the top left of your screen though, you can see they're roughly on par, and that's perhaps not a great sign for Cities 2, given how much newer, how much more of a modern title it is. And then of course we move through to those longer form, those deeper disappointments. Need I remind you maybe of the region packs, hotly anticipated and vitally needed to add more diversity to the game. 35 community creators, 8 regions, 2,500 creations entirely for free, split across all of these different geographies that you're seeing on your screen. Very little has been said about it, but again, there's that interdependency with modding, with code modding, all of those tools rolling out in full, I highly suspect. And then we move through to the beachfront disaster. Speaking of updates and DLC, this was of course initially a paid DLC. One of the worst reviewed products on Steam that I've ever seen, not just because it came with, well, a couple of trees, some buildings, many of them were the same, repeats of one another, but also because of that price tag. It left players with a nasty feeling in their mouth that the game wasn't working, but they were paying a premium. However, this loss would later become a win, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but first a word from this video's sponsor, War Thunder. A colossal game of PvP battles across the skies, and indeed the battlegrounds beneath them, available on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. War Thunder gives you command of over 2,500 vehicles from the 1920s right through to today's modern military hardware. With expert detailing, the vehicles are supported by War Thunder's realistic graphics and soundstage to place you at the heart of the fight, alongside, mind you, a community of over 70 million players worldwide. War Thunder has 3 distinct modes. Firstly, Arcade, an easy personal recommendation, providing enhanced vehicles and fast-paced matches, or alternatively the Hardcore Simulator mode, which ups the challenge and removes all of the safety buffers. And then there's the Realistic mode, a kind of middle battleground, if you will. Regardless of the mode you choose, don't worry, for War Thunder requires no extra hardware or expensive military-grade equipment. Just your keyboard and mouse or controller will be fine. So join us in War Thunder now. Play for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox. Just sign up. It's really easy using my link in the pinned comment, or video description down below. And to sweeten that deal just for you if you do, for a limited time, new or returning players who haven't played in the last 6 months receive this huge bonus pack, including multiple premium vehicles, 100,000 silver lions, 7 days of premium account features, an exclusive vehicle decorator, and more. Thank you, War Thunder, for sponsoring this video. Now let's turn our attention back to Cities 2. The wins this time, the big dubs. The losses, absolutely disappointing, but one of them had a silver lining, and it was this one, the Beachfront Properties Pack, which of course would later become free for all players, no longer having a price tag attached to it, and instead being free content, adding a little bit, at least, of diversity to the game's trees, buildings, assets. Most of them, of course, are kind of replications of one another, but the diversity is much appreciated. Speaking of which, of course, the patch updates, despite being horrendously filled sometimes with errors to performance, stability, gameplay, you name it, also have added some huge wins to the game. The most recent Detailers patch, for example, gave us the ability to finally change the surfaces within the game, adding a little bit of detail and flair to those awkward corners, awkward little bits of land that seem to pop up everywhere in Cities Skylines 2. More than just this customization though, of course, we also saw the introduction of many new buildings. Picking up from that theme about the Beachfront Properties Pack, these were also free. Here you can see some of the larger urban buildings, the police station, the fire station. These options, both on the larger end and smaller end, from things right the way through from education to transport, provided a pretty important gameplay twist as well to Cities 2, right? It's not just the aesthetics, now we actually have options to cater to different needs for differing populations. Is it a rural area where a small school looks okay, or does it need a biggie? And of course, loads of parks, ironically filled with homeless people, which the patch created. But nonetheless, this diversity, extra stuff, and crucially free stuff should not be overlooked because it directly fixes one of Cities Skylines 2's issues. Has it gone all the way? No, there'll be plenty more to do here, but this is a great start. And speaking of great starts, then we have Paradox Mods, which, as you'll probably know, is still in beta at the time of recording this video, and realistically probably for many more months yet, considering Colossal Order are currently on their summer holidays. We were initially expecting it around October, but we were also expecting the console version to release then. I would temper your expectations. The patches, the mods, and the Beachfront flip-flop have all ultimately achieved kind of the same goal though. They've added more stuff to Cities 2, and it's all eventually been for free. The final dub for Cities 2 here, before I move on to perhaps what is the interesting in this PMI of a video, is actually just playing it itself. I would be lying to you if I said I didn't enjoy building these cities and recording these clips when the game is performing up to standard. It is a fun city builder, and we'll return to this at the end of the video. But first, what about that performance and stability? This is really the crux of Cities 2's issues. It's the thing that I harped on about before the game came out, as it came out, and I wasn't alone. You've probably experienced it too. I'm going to swap to some actual gameplay footage, and let's take a look at how it's performing on my high-end system. 4090 graphics card, not quite as good a processor, but still a very new one, a 12900K i9 desktop processor, 64 gigs of RAM. You can see that in a relatively small city, on a slow speed, and even on higher speeds, the game runs really well on my system, 60 to 90 FPS. But what about when you up the ante? This 150,000 population city really struggles, and for me it starts at around the 100k mark, maybe a little bit earlier. Here I'm running on 3 speed, and it does turn into a PowerPoint in many instances. I don't expect it to run like an FPS game, and definitely not at these kind of larger sizes. But we were promised to be able to build big, to build huge. And honestly, even on a pretty high-end system like mine, a very high-end system, it doesn't really deliver. That being said, of course, there are things you can do. Here I've dropped the speed, and ignoring the frustrating graphical issues that you probably saw up there, it runs okay, right? It does. I can get 30 FPS if I slow down the game and don't move around too much. But that's not exactly a glowing review. My overall early verdict on performance here is that if you've got a high-end system like me, you can actually play Cities 2. You can play it pretty well, and until your cities get very, very big, you shouldn't struggle too much. That being said, lower-end systems, big cities, you're still going to struggle. So then, what is the verdict here? What actually comes out of this highlight tour at the last 9 months since the game released, 12 months since that big promise hit our screens? Well, I think, in general, actually, Cities Skylines 2 will still be the definitive city builder. That verdict hasn't changed since the game released. And as I mentioned earlier, it is fun to play. I like recording these shots. I like building these cities. It's an enjoyable game. However, it's not enjoyable when it can't run properly. When your city gets too big, you're left with a choice of either giving up on it or starting afresh. The starting afresh is fun, and the extra diversity, extra assets, all of the good stuff that has been added to Cities 2, including the extra realism, by the way, that came from the economy patch, is greatly appreciated. I think it would also be fair to say that there was a lot of animosity within the community toward the developers, and many might feel also a little bit from them, right? Things got a little bit heated and toxic, and some of the announcements and wording was far from what I would use if I was advising them. I think that we have seen some improvement on this front. As the game gets better and starts to deliver more, I think that the animosity has dropped a little bit. Perhaps the wound isn't quite as fresh. I don't know. It'll probably vary person to person. I think that's ultimately going to be a good thing for the community and the game itself, and in my personal opinion, I feel the Colossal Order have kind of dropped off a little bit on that slightly aggressive communications front, and I believe that they've delivered probably the best version of Cities 2 that we've had so far, the version that we have right now. Stability issues still exist. Performance issues, crashing issues, absolutely still exist. But we have seen general improvement across the board in all areas. To summarize, I think that Cities 2 is getting better, but it's not where it needs to be yet. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'd love to engage in a little bit of discussion on this bad boy. Before you go, my huge thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. You can play War Thunder for free now on PC and consoles using my little old link in the pinned comment or video description below, and for a limited time, new and returning players who haven't played in the last 6 months will also receive that big old bonus pack with premium vehicles, 100,000 silver lions, and heaps of other great stuff. Thank you for watching.